Hello Flight Simmers and welcome back to Alpha Hotel Flight Simulator Training. This video is part 1 in a 3-video series where we'll conduct the IFR cross-country training required to complete an instrument rating in the US. The IFR cross-country training flight is where all of the skills you've learned during the instrument training, like basic aircraft control, procedure turns, holding patterns, instrument departures, en route flying, instrument arrivals, and all the different types of approach procedures you learn come together and where you can demonstrate how they'll be used in practical day-to-day IFR flying. In this first video, we'll do a broad overview of the 3 legs of the trip we'll take, then plan the first leg and demonstrate flying it. Videos 2 and 3 will cover planning and flying the second and third legs of the trip. As always, if you enjoy the content, be sure to like the video, share with your friends, subscribe to the channel, and ring the notification bell to be alerted to new content. Before watching this video, it's a good idea to be familiar with the basics of instrument flight, instrument departures, en route flying and reading en route charts, and instrument arrivals. Additionally, you should also be familiar with the basics of flying instrument approaches. Specifically, we'll be flying a localizer back course approach and a VOR approach on the first leg of this cross country, so it's a good idea to be familiar with those. Since these are also non-precision approaches without vertical guidance, it's a good idea to be familiar with how to descend on an instrument approach that doesn't have any vertical guidance. I'll leave links to all of those videos, plus a link to the entire instrument flying playlist in this video's description. The requirements for IFR cross-country training to get an instrument airplane rating in the U.S. are listed in FAR 6165 and its paragraph D, subparagraph 2. The rule states that you must conduct 1 IFR cross-country training flight with an authorized instructor. The flight must be performed under instrument flight rules or IFR, so you actually have to file an IFR flight plan and get an IFR clearance when conducting the flight. You don't actually have to conduct the flight in instrument meteorological conditions, but you should expect to wear a view limiting device in the real world if you're not actually in the clouds. The flight must be at least 250 nautical miles in length along airways or by directed routing from an ATC facility. Really, this wording means you can file the route any way you'd like to. You can put it over airways if you'd like to. You can take advantage of RNAV airways, or you can just go GPS direct. The flight must include an instrument approach at each airport of intended landing on the flight, and it must include at least 3 different kinds of instrument approaches with the use of navigation systems. Technically, the rules don't say that you need to fly to 3 different airports. It would be legal just to fly out to one airport and back to your departure airport, or even fly a single leg to one airport as long as it's 250 nautical miles away. But you would still need to fly at least 3 different types of approaches during the course of the flight, but there's no rule that says you can't do all of the approaches at the same airport. That being said, most instructors typically plan this flight as a 3-leg, 3-airport round-robin type flight, and that's the way we'll do it for this video. So for our IFR cross-country training flight, we'll fly a 3-leg round-robin itinerary from Addison Airport in Addison, Texas, in the Dallas-Fort Worth, Texas area, with stops in Texarkana, Arkansas, and Mena, Arkansas, and then returning back to Addison. All told, the trip is about 400 nautical miles in length, so we'll be well over the 250 nautical miles we need per the regulations, and it will entail a total of 4 different types of approaches at 3 different airports, so we've got that requirement taken care of as well. We'll plan to fly it in the G1000 equipped Cessna 172, though you could also fly it in the Cessna 172 Classic or Analog panel with the Garmin GNS 530 and 430 from the deluxe edition of the sim if you would like to do that. The first leg of the flight will be a flight from Addison Airport in Addison, Texas, in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. The identifier on that field is Kilo Alpha Delta Sierra to Texarkana Regional Airport in Texarkana, Arkansas. Identifier on that field is Kilo Tango X-Ray Kilo. On this leg, we will be focused on traditional ground-based navigation. So we're going to fly a traditional VOR-based standard instrument departure, and then we will fly a localizer back course approach into Texarkana, and spoiler alert, the weather is going to get bad and we'll have to go missed approach off of that approach. And then once we execute the missed approach, we'll go direct to the Texarkana VORTAC and do the procedure turn for the VOR to runway 13, which will conduct to a full stop landing. This is the leg we'll be demonstrating in today's video, and we'll conduct a detailed briefing on the flight in just a little bit. Our second leg will be from Texarkana to Mena Intermountain Airport in Mena, Arkansas. The identifier on that field is Kilo Mike Echo Zulu. This will be a little bit of a hybrid leg, so we'll use some ground-based navigation and some GPS navigation on this leg. We'll take off from Texarkana and either go direct back to the Texarkana VORTAC, or we'll get ourselves on an intercept heading to intercept Victor 289, and that will give us some practice on navigating on Victor Airways. Once we get 20 or 30 nautical miles north of Texarkana VORTAC, we'll go ahead and switch over to navigating with GPS. So what we'll do is we'll proceed direct to the Demeza intersection, which will allow us to join up with the ILS to runway 27 there in Mena. This ILS approach is a little different from your standard ILS approach in that you can use GPS navigation to get established on the approach before you switch over to the ground-based localizer and glide slope to fly the approach itself. It also has a higher than standard decision height or decision altitude because of the terrain that is around the airport. For the third and final leg, we'll fly from Mena back to Addison Airport. On this leg, we'll use primarily GPS to navigate. We'll take off from Mena, which will give us some practice taking off from an airport with terrain under IFR. Then we'll navigate direct via GPS to Ronnie intersection or Ronnie waypoint and on to the Slant 3 RNAV standard terminal arrival route. And then we'll fly the RNAV GPS approach to runway 16 into Addison to finish the trip. So let's look in detail and do a detailed brief for the first leg of this training flight, which is the leg that we'll cover in this video. Again, we'll be flying from Addison Airport in the Dallas-Fort Worth, Texas area. The identifier on that field is Kilo Alpha Delta Sierra, to Texarkana Regional Airport at Webb Field in Texarkana, Arkansas, and the identifier there is Kilo Tango Echo X-Ray. Our filed route will be Addison Airport, then via the Dallas 3 departure, Texarkana transition, direct to Texarkana Airport. We'll file for an altitude of 7,000 feet on this eastbound leg. This is above the off-route obstruction clearance altitudes for all the sectors that we'll be passing through, and is also above the off-route obstruction clearance altitudes, the minimum obstacle clearance altitudes on the SID route for this particular route. It is technically above or below the MEA for the segment from Sharrow to Texarkana VOR, but it is above the minimum obstacle clearance altitude. So we do know we have legal obstacle clearance at 7,000 feet. Technically, the MEA means we may not be able to receive either Maverick or Texarkana VOR at that altitude, or possibly communications coverage, but I don't think so in the real world. But I have tested this out on the flight sim, and you can receive both Maverick and Texarkana from Sharrow intersection. In real life, if you started losing one of the VORs before you got to Sharrow or not picking up Texarkana, you could ask, for direct Texarkana via vectors, and they would probably clear you a certain heading and direct Texarkana when able. So that's a way you could get around it if you needed to stay at or below 7,000 in real life. The flight is 172 track miles in length, and it will take us about an hour and 45 minutes to fly it in the Cessna 172, though with the extra approach that we'll be flying, it will probably be closer to a total block time of around 2 hours in length. The current ATIS information at Addison is information alpha. It showing winds calm, visibility 3/4 mile, ceiling overcast 300, temperature 23, dew point 23, altimeter 2992, and they are showing the ILS approach 34 is currently in use. The forecast for the Addison area is for the weather to remain the same for most of the rest of the day. With that information, we'll plan to depart runway 34 at Addison. With the current weather, we can get back into Addison on the ILS if we needed to, and there are plenty of other airports nearby with ILS approaches that we could use as well if we needed to go somewhere else, and some of those do actually have lower minimums than Addison's ILS. So we looked up and checked the departure procedures for Addison. There are some non-standard takeoff minimums for runway 16, but only obstacle departure notes for runway 34. There's no special obstacle departure procedure or non-standard takeoff minimums for that runway. So if there was no SID, we could use the standard instrument departure or diverse departure procedure, but we'll need to take a look at the SID and see the SID that we filed to see what it says we need to do on departure. So looking at the Dallas 3 departure, Texarkana transition, which is the SID and transition that we filed, page 2 on this procedure tells us that we will be in controlled airspace when we take off because it is Class D. This is for all the airports in the DFW area. Fly assigned heading for radar vectors to join the appropriate route. Maintain your ATC assigned altitude. I will note that I'm not going to be using air traffic control on this flight just because the standard default Microsoft Flight Simulator air traffic control is not very good for IFR flying. I may do a demonstration of it at some point. And then beyond, ATC has two problems. First of all, you can't use customized weather. It would always assume that the weather is live weather no matter what you set in the sim. And then it doesn't give you a choice on the runways that you use, so you won't have a choice on your approaches or the runways that you use, and you can't currently make that request. So I will just be my own air traffic controller, but I will try to follow what I think are the standard procedures for the Dallas area as we depart and the standard procedures in Texarkana once we get there. So to actually fly, so what we'll assume here is that they're initially going to give us runway heading, and then we'll assume that we'll get a vector to join the departure. So here's Addison right here. We're navigating off the Maverick VOR. Obviously, we're not going to go back to Maverick. That's right over the top of DFW. We'll be heading up this way on runway heading, that we would probably get a crosswind turn, and then probably a turn down to the southwest to go and intercept the departure and join the departure. As far as the departure itself, we are navigating initially off of Maverick VOR on 13.1. We're going to be tracking the 074 degree radial, and we'll take that out to 36 miles, and that is Tris intersection. There is no change of course there. That's just something to let us know where we are. And then we'll take the 074 degree course, or the radial, continue on that till we get out to 76 nautical miles or 76 DME, and then we know we're at Sharrow. At that point, we want to switch over to navigating off of Texarkana VOR on 16.3. So we'll go and flip over there. We will track the 244 degree radial inbound, and that is a 064 degree course. So I'm kind of assuming with altitude, probably our initial cleared altitude would be 3,000. And then as we turn out to the east to intercept the departure, I imagine they keep you probably around 3,000, maybe 5,000 when you get out to about 20 nautical miles. But they probably hold you down, a little while to give you clearance from kind of the jet traffic. Once you get to about 20 nautical miles, I would imagine they probably clear you up a little bit higher. And so we'll do that. We'll stay down at 3,000. We'll assume our initial cleared altitude will be 3,000, and then once we get out to this ring right here, which is should be about 20 nautical miles or so away from Maverick VOR, then I'm going to assume that they would climb us on up to 7,000. Remember, you don't need to worry about where any of these Class Bravo shelves are. By virtue of being cleared to 4,000, you are automatically being cleared into the Class Bravo airspace as an IFR flight, so you don't need to worry about getting clearance into Class Bravo airspace. Once we get to Texarkana, we'll plan to fly the localizer back course to runway 4. It's a good idea to look over the chart before you depart to be familiar with it, but we will actually brief this approach once we're in the cruise phase to have something to do in the cruise phase. I will note that this approach has been decommissioned in the real world, so it's no longer available to fly in real life. It was decommissioned around the first of the year in 2024, but it still works just fine in Flight Simulator. It is probably difficult to find a chart for it though, so if you need to, take a screenshot of it from this video and then have that use that to have the approach plate available for actually flying the approach. Again, we're going to simulate that the weather turns crappy on this approach, and so we'll end up going missed approach out of this approach, and then we'll fly the VOR to runway 13, and again, we'll brief that at cruise as well. So the current weather report out of Texarkana is saying that they have calm winds, 1 statute mile visibility, overcast ceiling 600 feet, temperature 23, dew point 23, altimeter 2992. The forecast for 1 hour before to 1 hour after our time of arrival shows that the winds will be calm, visibility is forecast to be 1 statute mile in mist, and the ceiling overcast 600, but they do have a tempo line below that that's showing between 1600Z and 1900Z. They're temporarily expecting 1/2 statute mile light rain, overcast, ceiling of 400 feet. So it looks like there's an area of light rain showers that might potentially move through around the time we are arriving and drop the visibility and the ceiling down below minimums for that localizer back course approach. Nod, nod, wink, wink. Of course, the weather reports and forecasts at Texarkana indicate that from 1 hour before to 1 hour after our estimated time of arrival, the ceiling is going to be well below the 2,000-foot ceiling and 3-mile visibility required by the 1-2-3 rule that would allow us to not file an alternate. So we do need to file an alternate. Looking around Texarkana at what is nearby, we do have El Dorado South Regional Airport at Goodwin Field. Identifier on that field is KELD, Kilo Echo Lima Delta, and it does have an ILS, and it has 2 RNAV approaches, and then it has a VOR DME. So I do need to look at the approach plates here to make sure I can file it as an alternate and that the alternate minimums are not standard. That they are standard. If I pull up the ILS, I can see it says alternate. It's not available as an alternate, so we cannot use this particular approach to file this airport as an alternate. But when I pull up the 2 RNAV approaches and the VOR DME, I notice that A is missing. So I can use these approaches to file this airport as an alternate. The alternate weather minimums are we need a minimum forecast of 800-foot ceiling and 2 miles visibility for our time of arrival there. And if we look at the forecast, we see that it is forecast to be that. So we will go ahead and list El Dorado as the alternate, and we will file that as our alternate. And just remember that if you do need to divert, if you get to Texarkana and you can't get in, you're not limited to going to El Dorado. You can choose any airport you'd like at that point, as long as you think you can get in. You choose the safest course of action for you at that point. So before we get going, let's talk a little bit about the fuel planning for this flight. We'll plan out each segment of the flight and see how much fuel we need for those segments or those phases, and then we will add it up all together and see how much fuel we need total for the flight, and then we'll plan what we're going to actually have on board. So for the engine start, taxi, run up, take off, and climb, we're going to need 4 gallons of fuel. And if you're wondering where I got that from, it says it's from the Cessna 172 manual. The performance section, the time, fuel, and distance to climb chart at max gross weight will probably actually burn a little less than this because we're actually not climbing all the way from sea level to 7,000 feet and we're not at max gross weight. But it says that in order to do that, it's going to take 12 minutes. It's going to use 2.6 gallons of gas, and it's going to take 16 miles of our total en route distance. And then it also says you need to add another 1.4 gallons for engine start, taxi, and takeoff allowance. So that comes up to a total of 4 gallons. And then for the en route portion of the climb, from the top of climb to Texarkana Airport, that's 156 nautical miles. We'll be doing about 115 knots of true airspeed and ground speed in the no wind condition we'll have today. So that's about an hour and 22 minutes of flying. In Microsoft Flight Simulator, the Cessna 172 burns about 12 gallons per hour. In real life, it's closer to 10 gallons per hour. but in Microsoft it does burn just a little bit more. So that's about 16.4 gallons we need to actually make the trip from the top of climb to the airport. We also, by the rules, need to carry enough fuel to get to our alternate. That's going to be 61 nautical miles from Texarkana to El Dorado. It's going to take us about 32 minutes to fly that, again at 115 knots of ground speed, and burning 12 gallons an hour. That'll be about 7.2 gallons of gas to get from Texarkana to El Dorado. IFR reserve fuel, we need to carry 45 minutes of that, and at 12 gallons an hour, that's going to be 9 gallons of fuel. That's all the fuel that we're legally required to carry. I would probably add a couple gallons in there, particularly since we're planning to fly 2 approaches out at Texarkana, but this is the legal minimum that we're required to carry. And so the total fuel required is 36.6 gallons, and our total fuel on board the aircraft, will go ahead and fill up both tanks all the way full. That'll be 53 gallons of usable fuel. So we've got plenty of gas and then some to spare. And if we do the math, that's about 16.4 gallons of extra gas that we don't have a plan for. That can serve as delay fuel or holding fuel if we need to hold or get delay vectors. If the weather goes down, we can attempt to wait it out there at Texarkana, and obviously it gives us the fuel to do an extra approach there in Texarkana. So that is, we'll go ahead and top it off, and that'll give us some extra fuel. Now let's go ahead and hop in the flight sim and get set up for our flight. All right, so to set up from the flight, we'll go to the world map, and we'll work our way from the top left across and then down to the bottom left, just like we usually do. So we'll go to aircraft, aircraft selection, and we want the Textron Aviation Cessna 172 Skyhawk G1000, or again, you can do this in the Cessna 172 Classic as well if you'd like to do that. You won't see Arista Blue unless you have this particular third-party livery pack installed that I do here. The liveries that we want, well, I go with blue and gold, but you can do whatever you'd like. Weight and balance, we'll go ahead and give ourselves 2 full tanks. Again, that's going to be 53 gallons of usable fuel. So a little bit extra there. Failures, so you don't need to do anything there. And then customization, you can do whatever you would like to do there. So going back to the world map, next thing we'll do is select our departure. So we will put in Kilo Alpha Delta Sierra is the identifier for Addison. And we'll go ahead and get it zoomed in there. And then, let's see here, I think the general aviation ramp, I think, is over here. So we'll put ourselves on there. But you could start on runway 34 if you wanted to do that. I'll just start on the ramp and taxi out, make it kind of more realistic. But if you wanted to start on the ramp, you could do that. As far as date and time, I'll go ahead and set a mid-June day. I'm just going to set the date here. We will set the weather in the sim itself. And then I will set the time. We're going to set time for about 9:40, 9:45, something like that. And we're going to target a departure time of 10 a.m. And that should give us plenty of time to do the full round robin trip and get back before it starts to get dark, especially this time of year. So that is everything for setting up in the world map. Now we will go ahead and click fly and get the weather and the avionics set up. All right, so as far as setting up the weather, again, we've got a mid-June day at about 9:40 to give us time to get everything ready and get the clearance. And then the way I have the weather set up is I have the altitude at AMSL, and then I don't do anything with the top 2 cloud layers. The bottom layer, I put at coverage 100%, density 1.0. We will have to change that when we get to Texarkana. Scatter is at 0, and it really doesn't matter what you do with it when you have an overcast cloud cover. Top altitude is 7,000 feet. That should have us breaking out somewhere between 5,000, 5,500 or something. We will be on top at our cruise altitude of 7,000. And it doesn't matter if you're in the clouds or not. You can put the cloud top higher if you'd like to be in it, but the main thing is that you're not able to see the ground, which is what I've got it set for here. Plus, it's a nice, pretty view when you're on top. Altitude bottom, I've got set at negative 500 feet, and that is 1,400 feet underneath the ILS decision altitude here, and that should set up so that if we did want to come back in, that would be good enough to get us back in. I do have just a little bit of rain in there, a little bit of precipitation, just 0.1 for a little bit of ambiance, and wet surfaces that would be kind of common in IFR flying. You don't want to put it up really much higher than that, and we will probably take it out in Texarkana, except for the one where we go missed approach. If you put much more in than this, you'll lose quite a bit of visibility. So we don't have any snow depth. The temperature is too high for that. I did not put any lightning. Wouldn't be wise to go flying with that in a GA aircraft. Temperatures up around 75 degrees, altimeter standard 2992, humidity is 1, and I like to keep it there because if you move it up, the clouds look kind of funky, they get kind of a weird lighting to them, and it also drops your visibility again, so you don't have control much over your visibility. So that is the weather all set up, so now let's hop in the aircraft and get our avionics set up. All right, so as far as setting up the avionics in nav number 1 in the active, I have 13.10, which is Maverick, which is Tango, Tango, Tango. And then in the standby, I have 16.3, which is Texarkana. And then I have 16.3 Texarkana active in number 2 so that I can see the bearing pointer when we get within range and I know when I am receiving it. As far as the setup down here, I do have 3,000 in here because I expect that will be my first cleared altitude. We will change that as needed once we get our clearance. And then I have the CDI set up to VOR number 1. I have the course of 074 dialed in here, which is the first course we're going to need to intercept to fly the Dallas 3 departure. I do have runway heading in there on the heading bug, which is 337 for runway 34. And then I have the DME pulled up. It is set to the number 1 nav, so I have DME for that. I have the bearing pointer set, number 1 bearing pointer set to nav number 1, and I have the number 2 bearing pointer pulled up for nav number 2, so I'll see both of those. I also put the moving map into the traffic map so that I don't have a moving map to cheat with, since we're using using ground-based navigation for this leg. I want to rely on that and not rely on being able to determine my position using a moving map. So we'll keep it just in the raw data and practice with that. That's everything we need to set up for the avionics, I believe. So we'll go ahead and call up and get our clearance now. All right, so Addison does have a air traffic control tower. They do have ground. They have ATIS. We'll assume that the ATIS is still alpha, so that is still current. They have a clearance delivery frequency on 119.55, so that's what we would call up. We'd call up and say Addison clearance, Cessna 172 Golf Hotel with alpha, looking for IFR clearance to Texarkana. They call back, they say, Cessna 172 Golf Hotel, you're cleared to the Texarkana Airport via the Dallas 3 departure. Texarkana transition, then as filed. On departure, fly runway heading, climb and maintain 3,000. Expect 7,000 in 10 minutes. Departure frequency is 124.3 and squawk 5502. So we read all of that back and we'll get our transponder code put in and get our radio set up for taxi. And then we'll go ahead and call for taxi and taxi on out. So after setting up the aircraft and getting our IFR clearance, we get cleared to taxi out to runway 34. We perform our run-up and taxi up short of the runway. We then call tower for our takeoff clearance, and they tell us Cessna 172 Golf Hotel, runway 34, wind calm, cleared for takeoff. We'll then accomplish our before takeoff checklist and perform a normal takeoff from runway 34, flying runway heading as specified in our initial IFR clearance. All right, so after takeoff, we have it stabilized on the autopilot, climbing at VY on the assigned runway heading, and tower hands us off to Dallas departure. So we will flip over to Dallas departure, and we will check in with them, say Cessna 172 Golf Hotel is with you, 1,900 climbing 3,000. They call back and they say Cessna 172 Golf Hotel radar contact climbing through 2,000, turn right heading 070, climb maintain 3,000. So we read that back and we'll get it turned over to a heading of 070. We'll climb to and level off at 3,000. We'll go ahead and get our after takeoff check accomplished at this time as well. And as we're climbing through 2,500 feet, they call back. They say Cessna 172 Golf Hotel, fly heading 110, intercept the 074 degree radial from Mavic VOR, join the Dallas 3 departure, and resume on navigation. So we read all of that back. I go ahead and turn it over to a heading of 110, and then we can tell from the Barrett pointer the head of the needle is going to fall, and we will be getting on course. It's going to take a little bit at this distance. We're about 14 nautical miles away from the VOR. So we'll just keep an eye on this. You could arm the VOR mode if you want. Just be aware if you do that, if you arm nav, it will arm VOR tracking mode. If you do that, it is going to, once it gets the course comes alive, it's going to get a little over aggressive in trying to, it'll try to correct to the right to get the course centered up. So I tend to leave it on this heading until it's within, pretty close to a half a dot or so, and then once it's at a half a dot, then I'll turn it over to the course heading and engage the VOR tracking mode. It'll be a little more stable at that point. There's 3,000 feet. I'm anticipating we'll be here for the next 5 miles or so, probably about 20 miles away. They will go ahead and climb us up to our cruise altitude of 7,000 feet, keeping us underneath the jet traffic at DFW. So the course is slowly working its way in over here. We'll join up with that, and we'll just wait for that climb. All right, so the course is coming alive. We are 19 miles from the station, so it's coming across pretty slowly, which is normal at this distance. And so I'm going to wait till it gets pretty much good and centered up to go ahead and turn to the heading and engage the VOR tracking mode just so it doesn't overseek. And I'm expecting a climb here in the next mile or so that they're going to go ahead and climb us up to 7,000 feet. And sure enough, as we get about 20 miles away from Mavic, we're getting clear of the jet traffic there at DFW and Love Field. They call up and they say Cessna 172, climb and maintain 7,000 feet. So I'll roll that into the altitude pre-select. I'll put it into a flight level change mode. I will nose up until I get to 74, and I'll go ahead and apply full power. And we'll get on up to our cruise altitude. Once we get on course here, I'll probably start leaning the mixture to get best power in the climb. So we're in the climb, going to 7,000 feet. The course is almost centered up here. We just got to climb to 7,000 and get their course centered up, and then we'll see what our next position fix is going to be. And you can see the needle's almost centered up there. I'm going to let it come in just a little bit more, and then I'll go ahead and turn to that heading and engage the VOR tracking mode so I don't have to worry about getting off course. The autopilot will keep me right on that radial until I tell it to do something else or until it loses the signal. You'll notice that the Texarkana bearing pointer just popped up, so I'm already receiving Texarkana. We're 132 nautical miles away. Pretty good reception out here in Microsoft Flight Simulator, so we know we can receive that once we get out to our second fix on the departure. I'll go ahead and turn over this way. I'll leave it slightly to right. It's not quite all the way centered up. I'll go ahead and hit the nav button. That engages us in the VOR tracking mode. So all that is looking good. And then let's see here. I'll pull up the en route chart. Let me back up the screen here a little bit so we've got some more room to look at charts. And so right now I am on my way on course on the Texarkana transition. We are approaching Tris intersection. That'll be at 36 DME, so another 15 miles or so to go until we get there. And then, of course, we get out to Sharrow at 76 nautical miles, and that's where we will transition over to navigating on Texarkana VOR instead of the Maverick VOR. You notice as we're climbing up here, we're starting to see a little bit of sunshine over here, and the cloud cover looks like it's getting a little lighter. That is normally what you see when you're getting close to the tops, and I'm expecting we'll break out of the tops here in probably a few hundred feet. I am also leaning the mixture just a little bit, bringing it back to make sure that I get maximum RPM. There's 2450, 2460. If it goes back down, I know I'm going the wrong way. 2470. We'll lean until we get the maximum RPM so we get a decent climb. Again, anytime you're above 3,000 feet in the 172, you can go ahead and lean that mixture. Looks like about 2480, 2490, and there we're coming out of the tops there. So it looks like we'll be about on top by about 2,000 feet or so. Once we get up top, you can see we're not quite out of all of the tops yet, and this is pretty realistic about how the tops are kind of, they're not completely flat, so you may be in and out for a few seconds. You do have to be careful in the wintertime. I don't think this is emulated in Flight Simulator, but if it is freezing, if you're above the freeze level, the tops of the clouds is where you get some of the worst ice that you are going to see. So you generally want to try to get out of the tops or underneath the tops if you're encountering icing. All right, so we have leveled off at our cruise altitude of 7,000 feet. I have leaned out the mixture for peak RPMs. I think they have tweaked the fuel flow in Microsoft Flight Simulator. We're now getting a fuel flow of about 8 gallons per hour instead of 12 gallons per hour, so we have plenty of gas on this. So the other estimate was just a little bit high. We just hit 36 DME on the 074 degree radial, so that means we just passed that first intersection on the Dallas 3 departure, which would be Tris, and now we've got 39 miles to go until we hit Sharrow and we start navigating off of Texarkana VOR. So the cruise check is complete. We're 37 miles away from DFW Airport, so that means we are now clear of the Bravo, and I expect about 40 to 50 miles we'll get the handoff to Fort Worth Center, and then the center will just monitor our progress en route, help us around any weather, and give us traffic advisories as we go. And so currently about 50 miles out of DFW, and we have reached the edge of DFW Approach's control, and we now would be transitioning over to Fort Worth Center, the Air Route Traffic Control Center. If you're curious what frequency you would be on real life, even if you're not using the air traffic control, just pull up this ATC window, and when it says Tune Fort Worth Center instead of Ask for Flight Following, that's where you know you've gone into somebody else's sector. So Approach would call up and say contact Fort Worth Center 132.85. We would read that back and then check in with the Fort Worth Center. Fort Worth Center Cessna 172 Golf Hotel is with you 7,000 feet. They'd say Fort Worth Cessna 172 Golf Hotel, Fort Worth Center, Roger, and then again they would be giving us traffic advisories if there was any traffic, and potentially help around, things like weather systems if those were out there, although that is primarily pilot responsibility, but they do often give you help if you need it. So we will continue on at this altitude, again looking for 76 miles. That's when we're going to transition over to navigating off of Texarkana VOR, and then we'll start getting ready for the approaches there in Texarkana. All right, so we're coming up on 79 miles. That's going to indicate that we've arrived at Sharrow intersection. There's 79 miles. So we need to go ahead and switch over to navigating on the Texarkana VOR. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this into heading mode right now. So we're in heading mode. And then I'm going to flip out the VOR frequencies here. So now Texarkana is up in number 1. I'm going to dial this over to the 064 degree course. Is what we're supposed to fly inbound to Texarkana. And you can see it's just a little bit off center. The radials in Flight Simulator are not quite exactly right. It's pretty close though. I'm going to go ahead and arm the nav back up. You can see it's gone back into VOR tracking. It's going to make sure it's going to go overcorrect and make sure we're good and in the center there. That's what a lot of the autopilot systems in Flight Simulator will do. So you can see it's kind of overcorrecting there, and now it's coming back over to the right again. That's why I typically don't arm VOR mode. So we're about 75 miles out of Texarkana. We have been handed off to Gregg Approach Control over there in Tyler, Texas, I believe. Or Gregg County Approach Control. We'll make sure we're still on with them. Been handed back to Fort Worth Center again here in just a little bit. We're close enough now that we can probably go into radio number 2 and start trying to dial up the ATIS for Texarkana. So let's go ahead and see if we can dial that in, and then we'll talk about briefing our approaches. So about 50 to 75 miles out, sometimes as far as 100 nautical miles out, you'll be able to pick up the ATIS at your destination airport. So we'll go ahead and dial that in and see what's going on in Texarkana. They are advertising information alpha being current. It was recorded at 1600 Z, currently reporting winds calm, 1 statute mile visibility, overcast, 600 temperature 2.23. Altimeter 2992, and they are advertising the RNAV GPS and localizer back course to runway 4 are in use. Before we start briefing the approaches, let's talk a little bit about descent planning. You want to allow at least 3 miles, well, you want to allow 3 miles to descend for every 1,000 feet of altitude that you need to descend. For example, if we expect to cross Texarkana VOR at 2,000 feet, our cruising altitude is 7,000 feet. 7 minus 2 is 5,000 feet that we need to descend. And if we multiply that times 3, we get 15. So we need to give ourselves at least 15 nautical miles to descend to that altitude. Now, in real life, air traffic control will normally descend you, but you should still be aware of when you should start your descent just in case they forget about you. And so you can prompt them that you need to descend. And you'll even see this option available in the program like Beyond ATC, where you can say, hey, can we start down now? What kind of rate of descent do you need? Generally, to maintain a 3-degree descent rate, you want to use 5 times your ground speed. So example, if your ground speed is 100 knots, multiply that times 5, you get a 500 foot per minute descent. Will get you, if you start at 15 nautical miles, you should cross Texarkana right at about 2,000 feet. So that's the descent rate that you want to use. Let's go ahead and look now and do a briefing on our approaches before we start our descent into the Texarkana area. So we won't do quite as thorough a briefing as we have done in our training flights, but we'll go ahead and brief the approach here. So I'm looking at Texarkana, Arkansas. It's the localizer back course approach to runway 4 at Texarkana Regional Airfield. TXK is the identifier there, so I know I am looking at the right plate for the right airport and the right approach. It says it's a localizer with DME, identifier ITXK. It's 11.9 on the frequency, and the channel is for the TACAN users. Just tells us as civilian users it has DME. Approach course is 040. If I'm using a mechanical HSI, I want to dial in 220, but since we're using the G1000, then we don't, it will automatically dial in the course for us. We'll just double check that it's on 220 and point it at our tail for correct sensing. Of course, in the classic 172, it's not, doesn't matter what you put the OBS on, you just remember you need to remember that you're going to get reverse sensing on the needle. Runway landing length is 6,602 feet, plenty long for our Cessna 172. Touchdown zone elevation is 360. Airport is at 390. It does have non-standard either takeoff minimums, an obstacle departure procedure, or obstacle departure notes. We'll need to look at that on our way out if we're departing under IFR, which we are. Non-standard minimums for using this airport as an alternate, but that does not apply to us. It says visibility reduction by helicopters not authorized. That doesn't matter. We're not a helicopter. ADF and DME are required. We have both of those, and we need the ADF for the missed approach procedure. When the local altimeter setting is not received, that is not applicable to us because we are using the local altimeter setting. It says you got to increase your visibilities and whatnot. So again, that note is not applicable. We do have the local altimeter setting. Missed approach, climb straight ahead to 2,000 via the ITXK Northeast course. So we're going to track the front course out to TECO locator outer marker out to this NDB, which is at 6.9 DME on the localizer transmitter, and hold. We are most likely going to get amended missed approach instructions and just fly out here and then go direct to the VOR to set up for the VOR approach. It has all of our frequencies that we are going to use there. Depicts the water there for us. It depicts the obstacles. Looks like this is the tallest obstacle south of the, kind of southeast of the field at 651 feet on our altimeter. Not really a factor for us. We do have a feeder route that we are going to use from Texarkana VOR or VORTAC down to Marie intersection, and that is what we track. It says the altitude is 2,000 feet. The course is 172. It's the 172-degree radial, and it's 7.6 nautical miles long. We do have a holding pattern in lieu of a procedure turn, and we will do that. We'll talk about how we're going to do that here in just a little bit. And then we have our initial approach fix of Marie intersection, where we will start the approach from. Again, we'll start it from Texarkana from the feeder route, but that feeds to the initial approach fix of Marie. We'll do this procedure turn, and then we'll proceed inbound on the actual approach. Gives us the localizer data information here, 11.9 the frequency. It's got the Morse code, the 4-letter identifier, and the TACAN channel, which again just tells us as civilian users it has DME, lets us know this is a back course. If you have a traditional VOR indicator, it's going to have reverse sensing, and an HSI, you need to dial in your front course heading to make sure that you get correct sensing. The MSA is based on being within 25 nautical miles of Texarkana VORTAC. As long as you're within 25 nautical miles, 2,000 feet will keep you at a legal obstacle clearance altitude. Looking at the profile view here, tells us it's a 1-minute holding pattern, 2,000 feet when we're in the holding pattern. Our final approach fix, or where we'll start the descent, is Marie intersection, which we could identify as being on the back course at 4.7 DME. It gives us our 3.04 degree visual descent angle and the threshold crossing height. And then it says the missed approach point is 0.5 miles from the localizer transmitter, or 0.5 DME is where if we don't see anything, we'll go missed approach. We're going to do a continuous descent final approach, so we'll actually miss at our derived decision altitude, and we'll talk about that here in a little bit. Our minimums for our Category A Cessna 172, our MDA is going to be 880 feet. Visibility required is 1 statute mile, which we currently have. It's a 520-foot height above touchdown, so that's how high at 880 feet we'll be above the touchdown zone elevation, and the parentheses, of course, are for the military aircraft, so those don't apply to us. Neither do the C or D category minimums, and we are not shooting a circling approach, so those don't apply to us either. It also gives us the missed approach procedure down here, 2,100 feet, climb straight ahead, take the ITXK northeast course to the front course, out to TX, locate our outer marker, and then hold. It gives us the airport of the elevation. It gives us the touchdown zone elevation. It gives us approach lighting configuration. There are no approach lights on this runway, which is probably why the visibility is a mile. We do have a VASI. We do have an upslope on this runway. It gives us the length and width of both runways, shows us there's a displaced threshold on runway 13. That'll come into play here in a little bit when we come back and shoot the VOR to runway 3. Approach lights on 2 that we won't be able to use, or 2-2 that we won't be able to use. PAPI over here and over there, and a VASI on our runway. And the rotating beacon and the control tower are depicted as well. Shows you where the approach course comes in from. Tells us that we have medium intensity runway lighting and high intensity runway lighting, medium intensity for 1331, high intensity for 4 and 22. They are pilot controlled when the tower is not operative, which is moot in Flight Simulator. The tower is always on duty in Flight Sim. It does have the distance and the time if we wanted to time if we did not have DME. Kind of strange since it says DME is required. So you could time from your final approach fix to your missed approach point, but we have DME, so we can identify both the final approach fix and the missed approach point using the DME, and this is not something we need to worry about. So as far as how we are going to shoot this today in the Cessna 172, we're going to hit Texarkana VORTAC. So we're going to navigate into Texarkana VORTAC. Ordinarily, we would get vectors probably in a normal situation, but because the air traffic control in Microsoft Flight Simulator is not very good, we'll go ahead and utilize this feeder route. So we'll take up the 172-degree radial after we hit the VORTAC. We'll already be down at 2,000 feet, and we will track it outbound to 7.6 nautical miles, and the intersection of the radial and the localizer tells us we're at Marie intersection. And it's also 4.7 on the DME. So what I'll probably do is initially track this out on nav 1, and then when we get 3 or 4 miles away from the VOR, I'll go ahead and flip number one over to the localizer, so we get that all situated. And I'll put the Texarkana VOR up in nav number 2 on the bearing pointer, so I can keep an eye on that. Once we get to 4.7 dB on the localizer comes across. We know we've crossed that fix, and we can go ahead and enter the holding pattern in lieu of the procedure turn. From the direction we're coming, that's going to be a teardrop entry. That means we'll want to fly a heading that's 30 degrees left of this 220 degree heading to get to the end of this outbound leg, so that'll be a heading of 190. We'll do this for 1 minute. Timeout for 1 minute, and once we get to the end of 1 minute, we'll turn back around to the inbound course of 040 or an intercept heading of about 010 to intercept the localizer back course, and then we'll go ahead and fly the approach on in from there. So we will be performing this as a continuous descent final approach fix, and to remind you of how that works, we need to calculate a derived decision altitude, we need to calculate a descent rate to track the visual descent angle, and then we need to calculate descent cross checkpoints to make sure that we're staying on that visual descent angle. So with this approach, the DDA is pretty simple. You add 50 feet to your MDA. MDA is 880 plus 50 equals 930. So that we will treat like a decision height or decision altitude, and we will execute the missed approach once we reach that altitude. The visual descent angle is right down here on the approach plate. It's 3.04 degrees. And so if we look at our FAA climb and descent table, we average between 3 and 3.1 degrees, and it tells us the descent rate we're going to need to stay on that visual descent angle is 405 feet per minute. We also look on that table, and it shows that if we average between a 3.1 and a 3.0 degree angle, it means that we'll have to descend 324 feet per nautical mile. So we take a look. Our threshold crossing height is 52 feet above the touchdown zone elevation. Touchdown zone elevation is 360 feet. Add 50 feet to that, you come up with a threshold crossing altitude of 412 feet, and then we're going to need to be 324 feet higher for every mile we move away from the runway. So our descent cross checkpoints are going to be at 0.7 dm, which is 1 mile from the runway, 736 feet. That's below our DDA, so we should have the field inside at that point. At 1.7 miles, which is 2 miles from the runway, 1060. 2.7 miles is going to be 1384. 3.7 miles will be 1708. And then at 5 miles will be at 4.7 miles will be just initiating our descent at 2,000 feet. And if all that sounds like Greek to you and you're not understanding what's going on there, make sure and check out the video on instrument descents without vertical guidance, because we do a deep dive into how we calculate a continuous descent final approach fix, or how to fly a dive and drive type descent if you prefer to do that instead. So once we're established on the inbound course, we'll go ahead and configure the aircraft, bring the power to 1800 RPM. Once we're below 110, which we already should be, flaps to 10. When we get below 85 knots, as we're holding our altitude and allowing the aircraft to decelerate, we'll bring the flaps to 30 incrementally. At about 75 knots, we'll bring the power back into 2200 to 2400 RPM, so we'll maintain 70 knots at 2,000 feet in level flight. And then once we hit Marie intersection, we'll go ahead and start the descent. So we'll initiate a 400 feet per minute descent, reduce the power to 1800 to 2000 RPMs to maintain 70 knots. We will cross-check our altitudes with our descent cross-check points and adjust the descent rate as needed, and track the localizer back course with small changes in headings. And then we will transition to a visual once the required visual cues are in sight, or execute the missed approach port when we reach the derived decision altitude, which, spoiler alert, they will probably tell us once we start the descent that the visibility has gone down, rain has moved into the area, and that the ceiling has dropped. And then when we get to the DDA, we won't see anything. We'll have to execute the missed approach, and they will give us amended missed approach instructions to go out to the VOR. So looking at the plate for the VOR to runway 13, again, we're going to miss off of runway 6. They'll give us a turn direct to the VOR, and then we'll go out here and fly this procedure turn, climbing to 2,000 feet. It is Texarkana, Arkansas, VOR to runway 13 at Texarkana Regional Webb Field. TXK is the identifier. Again, right airport, right city, right plate. So we're good there. The VOR TAC frequency is 116.3, identifier TXK, channel 110. For the TACAN users, just tells us it has DME. The approach course is 122. Runway landing length on this runway is 45.59, still long enough for our Cessna 172. The touchdown zone is at 388 feet. The airport elevation is 390 feet. Same T and A arrows. None of those apply to us when we're coming into Texarkana. We will have to check the T obstacle departures when we depart. It says when local altimeter setting is not received, that is not applicable to us. It also says visibility reduction by helicopter is not applicable, and the VDP is not applicable when we use the Queen altimeter settings. None of these notes are applicable to us. We're not a helicopter. We are using the local altimeter settings. Missed approach is climb to 1,500 feet, then a climbing right turn to 2,000, go back direct to the VOR, and then hold at the VOR. Has our frequencies there that we're going to use in the order that we're going to use them. Has the water depicted. It has the obstacles depicted. They have some DME arcs that we could fly if we wanted to, but we're just going to do the procedure turn. And then it has the procedure turn. You go outbound from the VOR. Then you turn initially to a heading of 347, and then back to the left around to a 167 degree heading, and then fly the course inbound from there to fly the rest of the approach. Tells you Texarkana is an initial approach fix. It gives you the frequencies, the identifier, and the TACAN channel once again. And let's see, 809 is our tallest obstacle, a few other obstacles in the area, including one on the approach course, but it is well below our minimum descent altitude, so just make sure that your altimeters are set correctly. Actually, it looks like the tallest obstacle is up here north of the river at 945 feet on our altimeter, and that is way far away from the field, so not really a factor for us. MSA is the same as it was for the other approach, 2,000 feet from Texarkana VOR. Looking at our profile view, it shows the procedure turn coming outbound here. You can descend down to 2,000 feet. Since the MSA is 2,000 feet within 25 nautical miles of Texarkana, we'll just climb up to 2,000 feet on the missed approach off of the localizer back course. We'll assume that that's what they give us in the omitted missed approach instructions. Once we are inbound on the approach course, again, we're at 2,000 feet. Our final approach fix is the vortex, so our indication that we've crossed it is the flip from the to the from. It gives us the visual descent angle, the threshold crossing height, our visual descent point, or where we can descend, keep descending to a normal landing is 4.1 nautical miles, and we need to be aware if we pass 4.1 nautical miles, DME is going to be counting up. That once we pass that, we may be too high to make a normal landing at that point. 5.2 is our missed approach point. It is at the threshold of the runway, and that's where if we don't see anything, we'll execute the missed at the DDA, but normally if you don't see anything, if you were to do a dive and drive descent type technique, 5.2 is where you want to execute the missed approach if you have not seen anything. Minimums for us are 780 feet for the MDA. Again, we'll adjust that to a DDA. Still need 1 nautical mile visibility, and that 780 is 392 feet above the touchdown zone elevation. We don't need the C or D minimums, and we are not circling, so we don't need those. Airport elevation is the same. The touchdown zone elevation is 388 feet. It does have a displaced threshold, as we talked about on the last approach. We do have a PAPI on this runway, and then it gives us all the information for the other runways. Still has the same lighting. We could time the final approach fix, but we have DME, so we don't need to worry about that. So let's talk about specifically how we're going to fly this approach. So again, we missed the approach off of runway 6. The missed approach instructions were to turn left direct to Texarkana VOR, climb and maintain 2,000. As we make that turn, we request the VOR approach using the full procedure turn, and they clear us for it. So we're going to fly directly to the VOR. Once we cross the VOR, we'll track this 122-degree radial outbound. We'll do that for 2 minutes. That's going to be a 302-degree course. We'll have to remember to do our 5 T's. Time, turn, twist, throttle, and talk. Once we get to 2 minutes, we'll turn outbound to the right to this course of 347. We'll fly that course for a minute. And again, time, turn, twist, throttle, talk. Don't forget to turn your course back in to 122. Once we get out to 1 minute on this course, then we'll turn back around to this inbound course of 167, and we'll fly that until we intercept the 122-degree radial inbound. Then once we are going to do a CDFA descent or continuous descent final approach fix. So DDA, take your MDA at 50, that's 830 feet. Visual descent angle, again, is down here on the chart, 2.85 degrees. The descent rate from the FAA climb descent table is going to be 379 feet per minute. We'll probably just use 400, and we'll probably have to ease it off to 300 every now and again if we start getting too low. The feet per nautical mile to use for calculating our our cross checkpoints is 303 feet, and our threshold crossing height is 54 feet above the threshold. And if we get a threshold crossing altitude, we add 54 feet to our touchdown zone elevation of 388. That comes out to be 442. That's what our altimeter should read as we cross the threshold at 5.2 DME. So our descent cross checkpoints, 4.2 nautical miles. We add another 303 feet. We should be at 745 on our altimeter. That's below our DDA. We should have the field in sight at that point. At 3.2 nautical miles, that's 2 miles away from the field. 1048 is what we should be at. 2.2, we should be at 1351. 1.2 at 1654. And then 0.2, just after we've crossed the VOR, we should be at 1957. So the technique for flying this approach once we get to the final approach fix, when we're 3 miles from the Texarkana VOR, we'll go ahead and configure. So power to 1800. When we're below 110, flaps to 10 degrees. When we're below 85, again, we're holding the altitude, allowing the aircraft to slow. We'll bring flaps to 30 incrementally. At 70 knots, or actually about 75 knots, bring that power back in so that we maintain 70 knots at level flight in the landing configuration. And then we'll start our descent down at the final approach fix. Once we're stabilized in level flight at 70 knots, you can do whatever you'd like with the autopilot and the flight director. I will be flying the approach with the autopilot and flight director on. For the actual descent, once we cross Texarkana VOR, initiate that 400 feet per minute descent. Again, we may have to ease off on that a little bit if we start looking at our cross checkpoints and we're too low. Reduce the power to 1700 to 1900 RPMs. Sorry, it should be 1800 to 2000 RPMs to maintain that 70 knots. Cross-check the altitude with the descent cross-check points. Adjust your descent rate as needed. Track the VOR radial with small changes in your heading, and then transition to a visual landing once your visual crews are in sight, or execute the missed approach once you reach the DDA. All right, let's go ahead and see how close we are to Texarkana and see if it's time to head down yet. Okay, so now we're about 45 miles out of Texarkana. We've picked up the ATIS. We've briefed the approach. A few more things we want to do on the panel. I've got the backup frequency number 1 set to 11.9. That is going to be our localizer frequency for the back course. I also need to put in my minimum, so I'll go to timer ref, and I will go down. Let's see, actually I want to put in the glide speed here of 70 knots for the approach speed to have a reference there for that. I'm going to turn off the rotate speed because I don't need that anymore. And I will turn on the minimums to baro minimums. And let's see here, DDA was going to be, let's see, I'm looking at the wrong approach here. Let's see here, I'm looking for the localizer back course, so 880 plus 50 would be 930 is what I want to set in there. So I'll set all that up. All right, so there's 930 in the baro bug. That is all good. Make sure that is on. Baro set. Okay, so we're good there. See the bug at the bottom. And then the other thing that I'm going to do is set up the weather so that it is good to go for our missed approach. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to change the tops of the clouds are going to be a little bit higher now. I put the bottoms at -200. That is setting up for our VOR approach. I've still got the density. Actually, I'm going to crank up the density and probably add some precipitation so we won't see anything on the localizer back course approach, but then I'm going to drop this down to 0.5 when we get ready to go shoot the, and get rid of the precipitation when we get ready to go shoot the VOR approach, so we do get in on that one. So that is all set. Now we're just waiting for about 15 or 20 miles from the VOR. We should be getting handed off to Texarkana Approach here pretty soon. We are back with Fort Worth Center 132.85 right now, and we'll expect a descent clearance here at about 20 miles away from the VOR or so. And we get a little further along the road here, about 25 miles out of Texarkana. I forgot Texarkana does not have an approach control. They do not have a radar approach. So that service is handled by Fort Worth Center, and then the tower there at Texarkana gets a radar feed from the center. So we've checked on with the Fort Worth Center for Texarkana and tell them that we have information alpha there at Texarkana. They say, Roger, understand you're an IFR training flight. Say approach requesting and how that's going to terminate. So we let them know that we're planning to fly the localizer back course to runway 4 from Texarkana VOR, and then we're going to execute the missed approach, and we'd like to do the VOR to runway 13 after that. They say, Roger, you can expect that. Pilot's discretion to send and maintain 2000. So I'll go ahead and read that back, and then I will dial in 2000 into the altitude window here, and then at about 20 miles or so, I need 15 miles, so I'll give myself a little extra room there just in case, and start the descent there at about 20 nautical miles. All right, so we just passed 20 miles, so I'm going to go ahead and put it into a vertical speed mode of 500 feet per minute. I'll go ahead and pull the power back to keep my speed between 100 and 105 or so as I make that descent. And then the other thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to come in here to the weather real quick, and I'm going to go ahead and amp that precipitation up so I have a lowered visibility, and I'll go into the cloud cover here, and I will also crank that density up so I can't see anything once we get down there, and we'll end up having to go mist out of this approach. So we'll go ahead and descend down to 2,000 feet, fly to the VOR, and then we'll take up that feeder route on the 172-degree radial and start the approach, that localizer back course approach. All right, so within about a mile of the VOR, I've gone ahead and I moved my heading bug to 172 so that when we get the flip, I can go ahead and just put it in heading mode to go directly over there. We'll be getting the flip here pretty soon. We're leveling at 2,000. So we're getting ready to level off. There's the flip. I'm going to go ahead and put it in heading mode because that's going to be a pretty sharp turn. I'll go ahead and get the course turned over there to 172 so we can track that outbound. And then we'll track it for just a couple miles, and then we'll switch it over to just the bearing pointer and get the localizer up in number 1. So there is 172. I'm going to go ahead and put in about a 10 degree, maybe even a 15 degree correction over here. You can see the needle is falling. The altitude on this segment is 2,000 feet, so I'm good there. Looking at the head of the needle falling there, so the course should center up here shortly. I'm going to take this 7.6 miles to the south. As we're intercepting this course, Fort Worth Center calls up and they say Cessna 172 Golf Hotel. In the event of a missed approach, since you're doing the VOR approach, climb to 2,000 and or make it a climbing left turn to 2,000 direct to Texarkana VOR. So we notate that as our amended missed approach instructions. We'll climb out to 400 feet before we make any turns. So that will be, let's see, about 790, 800 feet on our altimeter. And that will be our missed approach, how we're going to fly that. Oh, I forgot to mention, as you're coming down, don't forget to enrich in this mixture. You want that full rich by the time you reach about 3,000 feet. And the course is coming in here. We'll zoom in on the PFD here so we can see everything going in action. Also get Texarkana Tower up here in just a second as soon as we're course tracking here. We'll also assume that Fort Worth Center has given us clearance for the approach and that was given prior to us arriving at the VOR. That clearance would have been Cessna 172 Golf Hotel. Maintain 2,000 until established on the approach. You're cleared for the localizer back course, runway 4. All right, so it's pretty well centered up there. I'll go ahead and get it into the nav tracking mode there. Get it good and centered on a heading, and then we'll just put it into heading mode and put the localizer in number 1 and just watch that bearing pointer. See, 12387 is our frequency for the tower. 87. There that is, that's standing by. Go ahead and center up the heading bug there. That looks like it's tracking pretty well. I'm going to go ahead and put it into heading mode there. And then I'll go ahead and flip in the localizer frequency. And you'll notice it does go ahead and dial up that course of 220. It says 224. I'll go ahead and, I think I can change that, over to 220. So we'll change that over to 220. And that is our front course heading, which is what we want. So I'm looking for the intersection of this bearing, 7.6 miles, 4.7 miles on the localizer DME, and crossing the localizer back course. That's when I know I am at Marie intersection, and I can go ahead and turn out to that 290 heading for that teardrop entry into the holding pattern in lieu of the procedure turn. So there's the localizer coming across. 7.6, 4.7, there we cross the localizer, so I'll go out to that 190 heading. I'll bring my timer up, and I will go ahead and highlight start. Hit start, we'll fly out 1 minute, and then we'll turn right back around to that 040 course to track the localizer back course inbound. Timer's counting up. I'm going out 1 minute. I'm on the south side of the localizer course. I'm going to go ahead and maintain 2,000 feet. And once we get inbound on that 040 course, we'll go ahead and configure and get ready for the approach. All right, there's the minute. So I'm going to go ahead and use the heading mode to turn back around to the 040 course. So I'm passing through the outbound heading right now. See if I can get them to move a little faster here. I do want to go to the right because if I turned it to the left to 040, it would make a left turn to 040, and that is not what I want. So I'm going to leave it on about a 30-degree intercept for right now. And then if I come around to this heading and it's not on course yet, I'll just leave it in about a 30-degree intercept and allow it to intercept the back course. Don't forget that once we are on course, we want to go ahead and activate the back course tracking mode. I'm at 7.3 nautical miles, and Marie is at 4.7, so I'm about 3 miles away from the final approach fix. Just waiting for that course to come back in. On the inbound leg of that holding pattern, I can go ahead and get rid of my timer now. Just waiting for that course to come back in. And there it comes. So I'll go ahead and turn to 040. I'll activate the back course mode BC. That is active. It will automatically track for the reverse sensing and keep things in the center. And so I'm about 1 mile away, so I'm going to go ahead and configure for the approach. I'm below 110 knots. Go ahead and bring out that first notch of flaps. I'll bring the camera back so we can see all this. 85 knots, I want that second notch of flaps. I'll go ahead and flip some switches for my before landing checklist. There's the second notch. And there's the third notch, 75 knots. I'll bring it up to about 2,200 RPM. Now I'm looking for 4.7 to start my descent. I'm going to go ahead and roll this down to 900 feet. That is below my DDA of 930. There's 4.7. So we want to go ahead and hit vertical speed and about a 400 foot per minute descent. And I am going to reduce the power to stay at 70 knots. So we're all configured. Before landing checklist is complete. We would check in with the tower. They say, Cessna 172 Golf Hotel, you're cleared to land. Be advised that visibility is dropped to 1/2 mile. Ceiling is 400 foot overcast. Looks like we've had a rain shower move over the field. Should be off in the next couple of minutes, but right now the visibility has dropped down in some rain. So we acknowledge that, and now we're looking at our cross-check points. So we've got 3.7 coming right up, We should be at 1708, and it looks like we are pretty darn close. I'm happy with that. Next one we're looking for is going to be 2.7 at 1384. I'll back off the power just a little bit there. There's 2.8. 2.7, and I'm about 100 feet high, so I'm going to nose down to about a 500 foot per minute descent and adjust the power accordingly. Now I'm looking for 1.7 at 1060. Doesn't sound like the rain's getting any lighter, so I'm not overly optimistic we're going to see the field here. There's 1.9, 1.8, 1100 feet. At 1.7, looks like we're dead on the glide slope. I'm going to bring it back to a 400 foot per minute descent. 930 is our DDA. We're about 100 feet away. I'm going to take a look out there. I do not see anything right now. And there is 930. I got nothing, so we're going to go miss. So power's in, pitch up, flaps 1 notch. Airplane is climbing. I'm going to go ahead and get that 2nd notch in there. I'm going to trim for about 10 degrees. Trying to fly that runway heading. Bring up that last notch of flaps and pitch for VY. All right, we're above 800 feet, so we can go ahead and turn direct to the VOR. And we'll call tower and tell them we've gone missed approach. They call us back and they say Cessna 172 Golf Hotel Roger, contact Fort Worth Center. And we'll switch over to center and start getting set up for that next approach. All right, so we've got ourselves back on the VOR here at Texarkana. We're going directly there. We're back on with Fort Worth Center. They've said proceed direct to the VOR, maintain 2000 until established. You're cleared for the VOR runway 13. We're going to go ahead and go into our timer ref here, and we will readjust our barrel bugs now so that it is on the DDA of 830, so 100 feet lower. So that's good there. And then we just fly out to the VOR, and we'll fly our procedure turn out there. I'm going to go ahead and adjust the weather while I'm thinking about it so that it is in good stead for the next approach. So I'll get rid of the precipitation, go into the clouds. I'm going to drop the density down to 0.5. That should be good for flying this approach. And then we'll just fly out to the VOR, and then we'll fly outbound. Once I pull the chart up here, Texarkana VOR 13 on that 302 course. Let's see here. I'll actually, since I'm in VOR tracking mode, I will get my heading set up for 302. Get my timer up here. There goes the flip, so I'm going to go ahead and put it in heading mode, bring the timer up. Got a good from. So we'll go over here, stop and time out for 2 minutes. And then we want to time out on the 302 degree course, the 122 degree radial. There's the 302. It's coming up. I'll arm the nav. 2000 is a good altitude for both the procedure turn inbound and the procedure turn outbound. So we're good there. So we'll go out 2 minutes. And then we will turn out to that heading of 374, do that for a minute, turn back around to intercept the inbound course, and then get ready to fly the approach. All right, so there is our 2 minutes, so we'll go ahead and turn to our heading of 347 over here. So we will do our, let's see, put it back in heading mode there. There is 347. I'll wait until I actually get on the heading to reset the time. I'll do my 5 T's. So we'll reset that. We're on the heading, so time is started. Turn we've done. Twists, we want to twist it to the 122 degree radial for the inbound course. Time, turn, twist, throttle we don't need to do. Talk, they have not asked us to report procedure turn inbound or outbound or anything like that, so we don't need to talk. We'll just go out for a minute, then we'll make a 180-degree turn to intercept the approach course. Then it's time to turn around and get established on that course and fly the approach on in, and hopefully we get in on this one. Right, there is our minute outbound. We'll go ahead and turn to the left, heading of 167 now, and we'll fly that to intercept the VOR course inbound, and then we'll fly that course inbound till we get about 3 miles away from the VOR, and then we'll go ahead and configure and get ready to fly the approach. Fort Worth calls us up and says, "Good news, guys. The looks like the weather, the rain has moved out. So it does look like visibility has lifted to 1 mile at the field, and the ceiling is lifted to 600 feet. Looks like you'll probably get in on this one." We thank him for the weather report and tell him we're procedure turn inbound. He says, "Roger, you're cleared for the VOR runway 13 approach," and I'll hand you off to tower here in just a little bit. All right, so the course is centering up here, so I'll go ahead and turn inbound here. Once it gets good and centered up, I'll go ahead and activate the nav tracking function. Don't forget, when we're flying over a VOR like this, it's probably it's going to drop off that nav tracking function. So I'll have to re-engage that on the other side of the VOR. There we go. Almost centered up, not quite. It's always those last couple of degrees. Close enough for government work. Okay, we've got the VOR tracking mode engaged. Now we're just waiting for that 3 mile point, and that's where we'll start to configure for the approach. All right, so there is 3 nautical miles. We'll go ahead and start configuring for the approach. So I will bring back the power to 1800 RPM. We're below 110, so I'll back the camera up here so you can see it. Flaps go to the first notch. Now we're waiting for 85 knots. There's 85. We'll go ahead and bring in that second notch. Bring in the third notch. There's 75, so I'll bring the RPM back up to 2200. Trying to maintain 70 knots. We'll go ahead and do our before landing checklist. And we'll go ahead and reset the altitude pre-select to 830, so we'll set it to 900 feet for our DDA of 830. So now we're just waiting for the flip from the to the from. When it does that, I'll put it in heading mode and I'll start the descent. We'll start checking our cross checkpoints as we move away from the VOR. And then our DDA again is going to be 830. So hopefully we'll see something by the time we get to 830 on this one. And they would hand us off to tower at this point. We check in with the tower, tell them we're approaching the VOR. They say Cessna 172 or Golf Hotel. Visibility is 1 mile, 600-foot ceiling. Looks like you're good to go this time, and you are clear to land runway 13. Wind is calm. We read all that back. There's the flip. I'm going to wait till I get a good solid from flag. All right, so we'll put it in vertical speed, nose down, and it's in roll hold right now. I'll bring that power back. And now we're going to start cross-checking our descent points. First one will be a 1.2, should be about 1650 when we get to there. I'm going to put it back in the nav tracking mode since the needle's good and centered up. Use the power to keep us on speed. And I'm looking for 1.2 and 1654. Before landing checklist is complete, we are cleared to land. There is 1.2, there we go. We should be at 1654. We're a little bit high, about 50 feet high. And since we want that descent rate of 380 and we're doing 400, I'm thinking we're going to catch up when we're probably good. So I'm going to wait and see what we're doing at 2.2. We should be about 1350 at that point. There's 1.8 coming up on 1450. There's 2.0, 1450. 2.1, 1400. There's 2.2 at 1390 or so. That's close enough for me. It's only about 50 feet off. We'll back off that power just a little bit, try to get it right at 70 knots. Next checkpoint is going to be 3.2, should be about 1050 at that point. There is 3.0, looking at 1130. 3.0, 1100, 3.2, 1100. Again, about 50 feet high. I'm okay with that. And we're looking for a DDA of 830, so we get about 200 feet to go. About 9:30, I'll take a look outside and see if we can see anything yet. It's 960, 950, 940. There's 930. We do have ground contact. And it's starting to go into hold. I'll take the autopilot off. And I do have the runway threshold lights in sight. It's a little bit off to skewed off to the right there. You can see the runway is pointing off to the right. So I'll make an adjustment there, keep my descent coming. And looks like we're going to get in. Looks like we've got at least a mile visibility. I can see all the way to the other end of the runway. And it looks like we're good to go. We're done with this leg of the cross country after we get in a safe landing. That concludes this video. Hopefully it's increased your understanding of how to plan and execute an IFR cross-country flight, particularly one that uses primarily ground-based navigation. Make sure to tune in for part 2 of this video in the next few weeks. Again, if you've enjoyed the content, don't forget to like the video, share with your friends, subscribe to the channel, and ring the notification bell to be alerted to new content. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.